Here's a question for you. Did you know that Buffalo almost made history with the Beatles? How did they do that? What are some of the other interesting connections between Western New York and the music and musicians scene? We're going to be talking about that today on this week's edition of the State of Greater Western New York Report, which, as always, is brought to you by. Each week, our community makes history. Each week, you make history. And each week, there's only one source to turn to for the first take on history. You know what that is? Subscribe to the Sentinel right now to discover the history being made in your own backyard. The Mendon Honeylake Falls Lima Sentinel. More than just your news, it's your history. Welcome, everyone, to this edition of the State of Greater Western New York Report. Join us each episode as we discuss fantastic topics ranging from history to science to the strange and the wonderful, as well as the treasured spirit with which our region has infused America. We challenge you to consider all things Greater Western New York, from our region's very beginnings to how it inspires, how it empowers, and why it is so admired. Here's the host of the State of Greater Western New York Report, Chris Carosa. Hi there, everybody, and welcome to the State of Greater Western New York Report. I'm Chris Carosa, and with us today is Rick Falkowski. He is an author and historian who has written many books about the Greater Western New York region. Rick, tell us a little bit about some of the books that you've written and how you got there. Rick is a returning guest, so for those who weren't on the first show who see him, you can actually probably go to the link if you're watching this on the archive and see the previous show. Rick, for those who didn't see that, tell us a little bit about yourself and some of the books that you've written.
Well, I published 4 books. The first book that I published was called The History of Buffalo Music and Entertainment. I published that back in 2017, and it's the black book over there. And that's the only book ever written that covers all styles and types of entertainment going all the way back to the 1800s. Where that came from is I've been involved in music and entertainment in Buffalo for like 60 years. I'm the founder of the Buffalo Music Hall of Fame and run large concert series here in Buffalo, so I've always been in music. After I published that book, I said, gee, I always wanted to be a history teacher, and I enjoy giving talks about history, so I published the Purple Book, which is Historic and Influential People from Buffalo and Western New York, the 1800s. That was published in 2019. And that covers like all the people that started Western New York, first doctors, lawyers, how the Erie Canal opened, what happened in the War of 1812, so on and so forth. Then COVID started and stuff like that. So I ended up publishing a book on what was going to be the entire 1900s, but ended up being just the early 1900s. And that came out in 2021. That covers how Buffalo became an industrial center and how we were, the largest city for the most number of millionaires per capita in the entire United States. That's the turn of the century. Then last year, November 15th, I published The Spirit of Buffalo Women. And that book was written really because women had never gotten their fair shake. You know, years ago, you'd be Mrs. John Smith. You wouldn't be Mary Smith. Women couldn't vote. Women started businesses, never got all the credit for it. So I covered 60 women in that book from the Buffalo area that had effect locally, nationally, internationally. And this is National Women's Month, so been doing a lot on that book this month here in the Buffalo area. So that's where it all came from and started.
Excellent. So this week we're going to be talking about music and musicians that hail from or are in some way related to the Greater Western New York region. Where do you want to start? I know we wanted to do this show in February, but our studio was still in the process of being remodeled. But tell us a little bit about maybe that connection and the Western New York region.
We were going to do a show the middle of February because on February 15th of 1905, a very famous songwriter was born in Buffalo. And somebody everybody knows called Hyman Arlock.
Hyman Arlock. Do I know that person? I do.
Of course you do. Everybody knows Hyman Arlock.
Who's Hyman Arlock?
Oh my God, I can't believe you don't know who Hyman Arlock is. Well, anyways, you got a slide of him coming up over here. Here's a picture of him performing on the Crystal Beach boat. Okay, and his father was the cantor of the synagogue in downtown Buffalo on the east side. And he wanted Hyman to follow in his footsteps and become the cantor at the synagogue because he was involved in music from a very early age. I think it's like about 15 years old in that picture that you can see over here. And but Hyman liked other styles of music. He liked that new, bebop jazz type stuff that was happening and everything like that. So he told his father he was going to become a songwriter and a performer. And so his father ended up getting a hold of a friend of his. Now, that friend of his happened to be a person by the name of Jack Yellen. Now, Jack Yellen was a writer for the Buffalo Express, which ended up becoming the Courier Express. And he also became a songwriter. And one of the songs that he wrote was Happy Days Are Here Again. And that became the theme song for the Democrat Party when Franklin D. Roosevelt ran on his New Deal and everything like that. Now, Jack Yellen also has a claim to fame that I consider very important. He wrote the song Ain't She Sweet. What's so important about the song Ain't She Sweet? That's the first song that the Beatles recorded. So Lennon and McCartney are considered probably, like greatest songwriters of our recent time era. But the very first time they recorded a record by Jack Yellen, a songwriter from Buffalo, New York. So Jack ended up meeting with Hyman and he ended up reporting back to the cantor. He says, Cantor, I hate to tell you this. Your son is a fantastic musician. There's no two ways about it. He's going to become a professional musician and probably a very successful songwriter. So Hyman Arlock became a very successful songwriter. Did you figure out who Hyman Arlock is yet?
No, tell me.
No? Okay. Well, go to the next slide and you're going to see Hyman Arlock decided the name Hyman Arlock really wasn't going to be that successful for being a songwriter. So what he did is he anglicized his first name from Hyman to Harold. And he took his parents' last names and put them together, and he became Harold Arlen. And of course, everybody knows who Harold Arlen is. Harold Arlen, probably one of the greatest songwriters of what's called the American Songbook, going back to like the Irving Berlin days, the early days of ASCAP and songwriters and everything like that. In fact, if you're not familiar with the name Harold Arlen, all you got to do is show one picture and everybody knows who Harold Arlen is. He wrote the soundtrack for The Wizard of Oz, and he wrote the song Over the Rainbow, which many people consider the greatest song ever written during the early 20th century. So now you know who Hyman Arlock is, right?
Right. So I had a question, and that is, I think you told me this story before. Correct me if I'm wrong, about the Beatles
Oh
and
yeah, well,
Buffalo, and how
yeah. Well,
we lost
Jack
the
Yellen.
opportunity. Yeah. Go
Oh,
ahead. Go ahead.
Jack Yellen, wrote the song the Beatles recorded first, but the Beatles became the Beatles because of their manager. Their manager was Brian Epstein. And Brian Epstein got the Beatles booked on the Ed Sullivan Show. The Beatles really weren't that known yet in the United States. And WKBW radio was like the most powerful station on the East Coast of the US. If you got your song played on KB, everybody from Bangor, Maine down to Key West, Florida heard your music. So Brian Epstein said, gee, if I can get WKBW radio to sponsor a Beatles concert the day after the Ed Sullivan Show, they'll get a whole bunch of airplay in the United States. So he approached KB. The people that would have put on the show are two legendary disc jockeys from Buffalo, New York. Okay. And that would be Joey Reynolds and Danny Neverth. They would have been the people putting on the show. They turned it down because it would have been on a Monday night in February on the waterfront in Buffalo at Memorial Auditorium. They said, it's an unknown band from England. Who's going to want to come to Buffalo on a Monday night in the middle of winter and see four guys with long hair from England? Well, so they turned it down. Nobody knew what was going to happen when the Beatles were on the Ed Sullivan Show. Beatlemania struck. Now, remember Danny Everest when he was on the air? He always had that slogan, Danny moves your fanny in the morning. Well, I checked the story to make sure it was true. And I said, Danny, is it true that you turned down the Beatles? He said, yes. and all they wanted was $3,500. And he says, the reason I move my fanny in the morning is because I'm still kicking myself for turning down the Beatles. Okay. So the Beatles' first concert in America ended up being the day after the Ed Sullivan Show in Washington, D.C. The tickets went on sale and sold out immediately. Buffalo lost the right to be the first place that the Beatles played. And I always say, when it comes to entertainment, that was as bad as the Super Bowl with wide right. We were definitely wide right in not having the Beatles perform in Buffalo.
Ouch, ouch, too soon.
Ouch, ouch.
Well, it's funny. $3,500. There was an ongoing joke, I think, in the mid '70s about Lorne Michaels from Saturday Night Live asking the Beatles to come on Saturday Night Live to perform, and he offered them $3,000. So he offered them less than what they were making when they were just starting. Never knew that.
Mm-hmm.
So when you talk about performing artists, where they perform in Western New York, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, we can go all the way back to Harold Arlen. Okay, Harold Arlen performed on the Crystal Beach Boat. That was a great gig. You're playing on the Crystal Beach Boat. Even during Prohibition, Crystal Beach Boat was huge because as soon as the Crystal Beach Boat left the Buffalo Harbor, you could drink because you're on international water going up into Canada. So they played there. And in 1926, Harold Arlen was the first person that played at what became the Crystal Beach Ballroom. The Crystal Beach Ballroom was built in 1926 at Crystal Beach. It was the largest dance floor in all of North America. Here's a picture showing how many people were on the dance floor. You could fit 1,500 couples dancing on that floor at any time. And as you notice, there's no obstructions. There's no posts or pillars or anything like that obstructing everything. And what they used to do is have big bands play there all the time. Anybody played there. Harold Arlen's band was one of the house bands, but also Tommy Dorsey would play there. Benny Goodman would play there. Anybody who's anybody and everybody, Guy Lombardo, were all regulars at the Crystal Beach Ballroom. And there was a law that if you had an American band playing in Canada, you had to hire a Canadian band of the same size and pay them an equal amount to perform. So you would have two big bands playing in Canada. The bands would play alternating sets, and they were told that your songs can only be 3 minutes long. Why? Because they would charge 10 cents a dance. And so people would be dancing on the dance floor there, and Crystal Beach was taking in like $20,000 in the 1920s from people dancing there. So Harold Austin had the band that performed there on a regular basis. He booked all the acts. He also had a place in Buffalo where he brought all these bands during the wintertime. And that place in the wintertime was the Delwood Ballroom. The Delwood Ballroom was on the corner of Main and Utica Streets in Buffalo. It was up on the second floor, and all it was a music hall. And once again, you would see, Benny Goodman, the Dorsey brothers, and everybody performing here on a regular basis. And the Delwood Ballroom never even served alcohol. And there would be thousands of people there on a regular basis just coming to see all the big bands. It's almost like Harold Austin had a monopoly, you could say. He had the Crystal Beach Boat, he had the Crystal Beach Ballroom, and he had the Delwood Ballroom. So any big band music ended up going through Harold Austin. And Buffalo is an amazing music place, because of all that going on.
So then
So did he have that?
what followed up after that?
Well, he didn't have monopoly, okay, because there were other, popular places in Buffalo. There was one place called the Chezemie, and the Chezemie was known for its revolving dance floor. And who owned the Chezemie? The Amagon family. That's the same people that own all the Amagon funeral homes was in the Western New York area right now. And there was another place that was really like the main club of Western New York back during that time period. And that was known as the Town Casino. Now, I got a picture here from Harold Wallens. Him and his partner ended up running the shows there. You can see it shows at the Town Casino were like New York City. This show's almost like Ziegfield's Follies. And back in this time period, everybody from Toronto used to come down to Buffalo to be able to see the shows. So Buffalo was the place for everybody to go. But the shows at the town casino only happened during the wintertime. What did they do during the summertime? The shows ended up going over to the Glen Park Casino, which is where Glen Park Amusement Park was in Williamsville, right next to Glen Falls, which is now just a park. And who got their start at Glen Park Casino? Sammy Davis Jr. When he was still a kid, he performed there with his father and his uncles. So Buffalo was really the place for live entertainment in Western New York.
Well, that was the past. When we come back after the break, we're going to talk more about the present day and maybe not so immediately today, but in the past few years or so when we come back on this week's episode of the State of Greater Western New York. Through the mists of time, nature and man have both created and buried treasures beyond the imagination. With the ages, these riches slowly dissolve into mere myths until they are forever forgotten. But there are those brave souls who tirelessly cling to the truth, ever seeking to discover the undiscovered, to reveal what has always been there, to uncover the hidden gems of a land thought forsaken but loved by millions. 50 Hidden Gems of Greater Western New York. Discover the secrets in your own backyard. Buy your copy now at 50hiddengems.com. Hey there, and welcome back to the State of Greater Western New York Report. I'm Chris Carosa. With us today is Rick Falkowski. He is the author of several books, including one book about music in the Western New York region. And it's been very fascinating. We've learned about the past from Harold Arlen, Somewhere Over the Rainbow, Ain't She Sweet, Happy Days Are Here Again, the band casino, various casinos and ballrooms in the area. That was, let's call that, say, the first half of the century. And we actually snuck a little bit into the second half of the century when we told the Beatles story. But let's talk about more recent times, say in the last 20 or 30 years, about what's going on, and in particular, your involvement and experience, which actually, I think, if I remember correctly, it led you to write this book.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about that.
You had said we were going to do the first show because that was on Harold Arlen's birthday. So you said, Rick, what happened sometime near the end of March? And I couldn't think of anything. But then I thought, gee, on April 1st of 1981, my wife and I started something called Buffalo Backstage Magazine. Now, there's a picture here of Buffalo Backstage Magazine. We had no idea what we were doing. This was an 8.5 by 10 sheet of paper folded in half, but we wanted a magazine to really promote what was happening in the Buffalo music scene. And Buffalo music during the early 1980s was huge. There were clubs all over the place. Harvey and Corky had Stage One. You had Uncle Sam's. You had Cougars. Every place you went, the Purple Moose, there were clubs all over the place within the Buffalo area. So we started writing about the music scene. And this magazine ended up becoming like the Bible, for Buffalo music during the 1980s. And of course, we ended up figuring out what we were doing. We learned what layout was. We learned what typesetting was. In fact, my wife got so good at doing layout that after we ended up closing the magazine, she got the job doing the layout for the Penny Saver. You might remember the Penny Saver magazine that was around the Western New York area. So that really got me writing a whole bunch of stories about Buffalo music. And we said, we want to do more to promote Buffalo music than just, doing the magazine. So what could we do? So we said, why don't we have a music awards for Buffalo? And music awards were going to be like a Grammy Awards for the Buffalo area. And the very first Buffalo Music Awards was held in November of 1981. It was a big deal. Everybody got behind this. In fact, you can see on the left over there is something signed by infamous mayor Jimmy Griffin, the go buy a six pack during the snowstorm, Jimmy Griffin, that he actually proclaimed the day of our very first music awards, Buffalo Music Day in Buffalo. So for the event, we ended up having it at a brand new club that opened, which was called Rooftops Lounge. And Rooftops was upstairs above where the Seneca Theater used to be, which was one of the Michael Shea theaters, back in the day. And what we did is we were going to honor all the musicians. If you look at the lineup of the bands that we had performing that day, Backroads, they were the top like country band in the area. Ben Hatzel, Cheater, they were out of Rochester. Strauss Fletcher, an early original band. Two Hills, country rock. The Bees, a rock band that did a lot of recording. Bucks, Perugia, which was like an alternative original show band. Talus, biggest band in Buffalo. And Vincent Michaels band. So these were all the top bands in Buffalo. We had this on a Monday night, and we ended up drawing over 1,000 people to the show. Channel 2, Channel 4, Channel 7 all came and covered it. We had spotlights going into the air. It was amazing. It was, proof that Buffalo had a fantastic music scene. So we ran the Buffalo Music Awards for a few years, and we said, God, that band Talus keeps winning all the time, because back in them days, Talus, of course, was the most popular band in Buffalo. So we said, well, if you look at Guitar Player magazine, when somebody wins awards all the time, they end up retiring them people. So what we did in November of 1983, Marcia and I started the Buffalo Music Hall of Fame. And the very first people that were inducted happened to be the three members of the band Talus. And you can see in this photo over here, you have Dave Constantino on the left, Billy Sheehan, probably one of the greatest bass players in the history of rock music. His band Mr. Big's going to be coming to Electric City. It's a new club that's opening in Buffalo where the Trafalgar used to be, and Paul Varga. And then you can see that handsome guy in the background with the blonde hair holding the Hall of Fame awards. That's me. But this was actually 41 years ago. So if you think about it, for over 40 years, we've been honoring the top musicians in Western New York with the Buffalo Music Hall of Fame. It's probably, I think for local Hall of Fames in the United States, it's the second oldest. I think the only one, you got the Bay Area Music Awards and Hall of Fame, and I think in Boston. They're like the only ones that are older than Buffalo. If we started through Buffalo Backstage Music Awards and the Hall of Fame. What's up with the Hall of Fame? Well, the Hall of Fame now, as you can see over here, here's the induction in 2023. It's now a certified 501c3 not-for-profit corporation. We have a building on Amherst Street, a couple doors down from Sportsman's Tavern. If you ever go to the Sportsman's, it's right there. And we've been inducting people into the Hall of Fame now for 41 years. This fall we'll have our 42nd induction ceremony for the Buffalo Music Hall of Fame. So that's moving along and is now run by a board of directors. And Marcia and I sit back and say, oh, we're the founders. So we just go there and say, hi, everybody. Good to see you. And it's really great that knowing something that you started so many years ago is still in existence until this day. And with everything that I wrote in Backstage, for the Music Awards program, for the early Hall of Fame, that's really what gave me my writing background to be able to go publishing books about Western New York history today. Plus the fact that for 25 years, I ran the business sales department for the cable company, TCI, which became Adelphia, which became AT&T, which became Time Warner, and is now Spectrum. I had the same job all the way through, just same desk, just working for different people. And my claim to fame with the cable company is I introduced Digital Music Express, which put Muzak out of business. And also, that was the first digital platform. And all music now is digital platforms. So that's what we started with, something called DMX with the cable company. So it's been a lot of fun and enjoyable with everything that I've been doing.
You certainly have a legacy when it comes to Western New York music. And I'll say this, if you had a picture of me in that era, 1983, I still wouldn't have hair. So,
I still got mine.
yeah, you still have yours for sure. So, yeah, this really begs the question. Music is one thing. What about media? How the music was delivered over the air, or how anything was delivered over the air?
Well, Buffalo was actually really big when it comes to the beginning of radio and television in New York State. In fact, Buffalo had the very first radio station in New York State outside of New York City. And that happened to be WGR Radio, which went on the air on May 22nd of 1922.
Oh,
So we've had music in Buffalo, over the air going all the way back to then. In fact, that might be something that could be a good show that we could
I
talk
was
about
going
in the
to
future.
say, would you like to come back
Yeah,
around that
yeah,
time?
we could talk about the beginning of radio. What were the first radio stations? The people that started the radio, who the first stations were, how the first television station came about in 1948. And for 5 years, they were the only television station here in Western New York. So that could be something we could talk about in the future. It'd be good to do that right around May 22nd,
Sure.
because that's the anniversary of the first radio broadcast in Buffalo, New York.
We'll definitely do that. Well, Rick, thank you for being a part of today's show. We'd like to thank everybody who was a member of our live audience. We didn't get a chance to get to your questions because it was chock full, but I'm sure that if you find Rick, you can email him and maybe ask him your questions directly, or better yet, read his book, because that really tells you everything that you need to know, at least some of it. If you want to be a member of our live audience, go to stateof.greaterwesternnewyork.com and sign up for free. Every Thursday morning, you'll get the secret link that is where you can join us on this virtual studio audience. And that's where you get to ask questions. It's the only place you can ask questions. You can watch this as it's recorded or after it's recorded on our archive, but you won't be able to ask questions. Or you could watch it on Sunday at 1:30 when it's rebroadcast on our YouTube and Facebook platforms. Just like our Facebook page or subscribe to our YouTube channel. And when the program is rebroadcast, those platforms will notify you. But the only way you'll be able to ask questions is by being a member of the live audience. So go to stateof.greaterwesternnewyork.com and join up, or at least go there to look at some of our, you know, older shows that might be of more interest, including the one that's me, that's not Rick, that that Rick was on. When was it? I think it was in November, December
Also,
last year.
sometime last year.
Yeah,
And I was going to say, if anybody's interested in my books, they're available in all the bookstores and gift shops around Western New York, such as like the Buffalo Store, Totally Buffalo, Buffalo Gift Emporium. And you can also get it online. It's on that bad word, Amazon. You can get it there if you're in other parts of the country watching this. And you can go to my Facebook page, also my webpage, buffalomusichistory.com, and get more information about the things that I'm doing, and come to some of the talks that I give around Western New York. I give like 2 talks a week. Most of them are private, for events. In fact, tonight I'm doing a talk for the anniversary of the Polish Businesswomen's Association, which is going to be cool. I'm looking forward to that. But a lot of the historical societies, libraries, and community centers all around Western New York. I love talking about Buffalo history.
all right. We love listening to you, Rick. Thank you again, and we'll see everyone next week. Bye bye for now.